I'm Alex, et voici le Minibrute. So you've probably heard of Arturia. They're a French company, been around for over 10 years now, and obviously they make software. They've made classic sort of recreations of vintage analog synths like the Mood Modular, the CS80, Jupiter 8, stuff like that. Actually, incidentally, those software instruments are just being relaunched and are going to be lower price. Have to get a plug-in for those. Do check that out. But they also make hardware synths like the Origin and hybrid instruments like the Analog Experience range and Spark. Those are kinds of combinations of software and hardware. But they've never made an analog synth until Minibrute, and that's crazy. I mean, like, it's a software company that's making an analog synth, you know. That's a kind of an unusual thing, I think. But I guess the point with Minibrute is there's a lot of expertise, there's a lot of heritage, and they worked with a guy, Yves Housson, who's actually works in Grenoble, where Arturia are based. He's a cellular biologist by trade, but in the evenings he basically maintains and builds modular analog synths. He's been doing that for over 30 years, and so Yves' designs are in the Minibrute. You know, there's an understanding of analog synthesis and a kind of selection of the best parts of the last 30 years of analog synthesis. So let's check the Minibrute out, find out what it sounds like and what we can do with it. Okay, so we've got an analog oscillator with loads of different wave shapes that we can blend together. We've got a filter with different modes. We've got two envelopes, one for filter, but it can control some other stuff too, and one for the amplification, just the loudness of the synth. And then down here we've got controls for what the mod wheel does, aftertouch, where we push even harder on the keyboard, it will actually affect the sound in different ways. The bend range of this, the pitch wheel, glide, so we glide between notes. There's a separate vibrato control with different sort of modes and obviously a rate control. Here's the LFO, and it can affect loads of different things. It can also be synced to the arpeggiator as well. And here's the arpeggiator itself, so the arpeggiator's got tons of controls too. That's pretty much it. I suppose there's the octave control here. But to get sound, all we do is we turn up one of the wave shapes, and that's it. So this is the oscillator section, and it's a single oscillator, but don't let that fool you. It is not your average oscillator. It does tons of different things, and in fact, there's loads of different wave shapes we can blend together. So to start with, we've got triangle, and we've got square, and we've got saw, and we've got a sub-oscillator. And we can just blend those together in varying quantities. You can sound more aggressive if you push it hard, or less if you push it low, so that can affect the tonal quality. For each one of these, though, we've got controls which do all kinds of interesting things to the sound. So for the saw, this is very cool. There's this thing called ultra saw, and basically that's like phase-shifted copies of this same saw wave being blended in with each other, and it's got this kind of movement to it, and there's a rate control for that movement. Sounds very cool. For the square, it's got a pulse width control, which you're probably familiar with other synths, and that can be controlled by the filter envelope or the LFO. And on the triangle, this is really, really cool. This is the Metalizer. A Metalizer is a form of wave folder. Primarily we see wave folders on modular analog synths. I'm not aware of a fixed architecture analog synth ever that had a wave folder. Now this is just super cool. It's got this kind of FM sort of chewy FM sound. Very cool. And that obviously can also be controlled by filter envelope, as we can on the pulse width here, and you can also control it with the LFO. So it's just really awesome. It's really characterful. So we love that. Moving on to the filter section, it's a Steiner-Parker filter. Niall Steiner is a synth designer in the 70s. We had synths like the Synthicon. He had his own modular system called the Synth system. And he patented this incredibly simple filter design, which is very elegant, very straightforward. it's inexpensive, but it sounded amazing. So it was very kind of known in the DIY community, and Yves Son, the guy who's partly responsible for designing the Minibrute, loves this filter clearly. That's partly why it's in here. It's got some interesting characteristics. It's a really nice basic tone. What's nice also is that when you up the resonance, you don't lose bass. So you can be really aggressive. It's got a really nice kind of squealy sound. And what's also cool is that this is multi-mode. So we've got low pass, we've got band pass, we've got high pass, and we've got notch. One thing I didn't mention about the oscillator section is that we do have noise, very useful, but we have an audio in, and that becomes useful with the filter, obviously. The audio in, there's an input round the back, and you can just chuck extra, drum loops or other synth sounds through this, and those will go through the filter, and you can do all kinds of cool things. There's controls here as well. This is also where we find the envelope speed. Actually, the envelopes themselves can go at 2 rates. There's 2 sets of rate controls, fast and slow. So fast, obviously, you can get really, really fast, like 1 millisecond clicks. So very, very fast for an analog envelope. And slow, you can get these really slow things. So very good for doing drones, stuff like that. Over here, this is very, very deserving of mention. This is the Brute Factor. Brute Factor is basically, it's a feedback stage where it's basically feeding the audio back in pre-filter. So it feeds back on itself. And it has this kind of really nice kind of aggressive fattening. It'll actually make sound even with no oscillators on, because you're just messing with the filter, so you can get all these kind of slightly weird behaviors that will occur in different filter modes. It's cool. And so you can use Brute Factor to kind of warm up the body of the synth. If you just want to give it a more of a vintage vibe, like, the Minibrute's actually very versatile. I'm creating loads of aggressive sounds on it because it's great at that, but it can also do really, really mellow stuff. And if you just want a bit of kind of 70s flavor, just a touch of Brute Factor will do that. Down here, LFO, very important. So the LFO is quite complex. Like, it's just one, but we can send it off to loads of different destinations. And here, I'm using the mod wheel to control the amount of LFO that's getting applied. We can do really cool stuff if we put the LFO onto that Metalizer. So I'll turn up the filter so you can hear it. There's a bit on the filter pitch there as well. Very cool. As I mentioned also, you can use the envelope control. So if I get this in action, we'll get a bit of movement on the Metalizer control. Very cool. Also, we've got the Arpeggiator, which is really actually quite complex. Like, this is digitally controlled, and that's a good thing because it means that obviously we can sync this to Midi. There is Midi and USB on the back of the synth, so Minibrute can basically be a Midi to CV converter, because we have CV ins and outs on the back as well, but Minibrute can sync to a DAW and it can sync to external equipment. So the Arpeggiator lets us do that. I will try and get a sound going on so we can kind of hear it arpeggiating. So you just turn it on like this. It's got tempo control. It's got tap tempo. That's very cool. So if you're playing with a band, obviously you can tap tempo if you don't have a MIDI source. Octave controls, 4 different modes, up, down, and random. There is also there's a menu which can be accessible via a software editor which allows you to engage another arpeggiator mode, which actually lets you input notes and it will play them as played. So you could play down, up, then this, then that, and it would play them in sequence, kind of like a mini sequencer. That's accessible along with a few of the bits and bobs with this free piece of software, and that can also control the velocity scaling of the keyboard, a few of the little bits and bobs, legato mode. So check that out. There's maybe not enough time to cover it here, but just know it's there, basically. We've also got swing control, which is cool. You can have a bit of swing. And this is amazing. This is like a clock dividing thing, so that we can, if we were receiving a MIDI clock from someone else, you can get all these kind of interesting rhythmic variations by adjusting the setting. And those are actually all musically in time with the master clock. So lots of fun to be had. So here is the back of the Minibrute. Analog synthesizer as it says, and as such we've actually got CV, control voltage, inputs and outputs. So this is pitch and gate out. When you're running the arpeggiator, it will actually send CV out, so you can use this to arpeggiate, play and sequence external analog gear. You've also got CV and gate inputs, so you can fire off the envelopes. You've got amp control, filter control and pitch control. So Minibrute can be controlled by loads of other analog kit too. Headphones, master output and the input, that's where we put in audio to process. The other very cool thing that you can do is if you are using external CV, analog gear, maybe you've got a modular and you've just got a single oscillator, send the CV and gate out and the pitch out to control the oscillator and route it back in, and you've just added a second oscillator to the Minibrute. And you could do that with other synths too, because it's MIDI controllable. So if you just had like a VA synth, you could send the output of Minibrute into the VA synth, and then just, without using a filter, run it in, and you can kind of augment the sound. The Minibrute is controlling the other synth and you're blending it in. Very cool thing to do. This gate source, it controls how, basically, in this mode, the gates, which are controlling the envelopes, will fire off whenever I play the keyboard. If I put it to hold, it will just stay open. So if you're doing kind of drones, if you don't want to trigger the keyboard, particularly also if you're processing external audio and you just want the keyboard to be, the filter to be open and accessible, you do that, then you don't need to keep hitting notes to trigger the actual, to hear the audio you're processing. The last source is audio. What that means is when you're plugging audio into here, once a certain threshold has been triggered, it will actually open the envelopes. That threshold is controlled with software, which is accessible by the software editor that you can get for free. So, but that's cool. It means that if you put in some drums or something like that, it will actually fire off the envelopes using that audio source, and you can get some really creative kind of rhythmic modulation stuff happening. These tiny little holes, rest assured, are actually meant to be on the back of your Minibrute. These are actually just for factory calibration of the oscillator pitch tracking, so don't worry, those are meant to be there, but you don't need to mess with them. MIDI in and out, this is obviously, you know what MIDI is, but what's very cool is that the MIDI input allows the Minibrute to be a MIDI to CV converter. So you can use the MIDI input and you can send CV out to external gear, so very cool sort of added feature. The same can be done with the USB, and this allows you to connect it to a computer, really easily send MIDI with that as well, and send and receive. Use it as a USB to CV converter, and also there's some software which we mentioned, and that's how you access it, so very, very cool. The only other thing to add is actually the keyboard, the synth is monophonic, but the keyboard itself will send polyphonic polyphonic MIDI with velocity. So you can use this, use Minibrute as just to control the keyboard for other synths, basically, and for just sequencing stuff in the computer. So that's the Minibrute. It's analog, it's insane amounts of fun. If you are new to synthesis, you can learn a hell of a lot by playing around with it, and it'll teach you about the way that synths are laid out. And obviously, if you know what you're doing, and you've got analog synths especially already lying around, Minibrute can totally become part of that system. You've got like MIDI to CD conversion built in, and it's just insanely fun. So definitely check it out. Go to DV, check out Minibrute, and pick one up. I hope you have a lot of fun with it. Thanks very much.